The Group Chief Executive Officer, Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Mele Kyari, has of course announced that the NNPC as a corporation grew its profits after tax from 287 billion naira in 2020 to 674 billion in 2021. He disclosed this at a press conference in Abuja and said the profit was contained in the group's audited financial statements of the firm for the year ended December 31st, 2021. Joining us now to discuss further, Mustapha Alao is an investment research analyst with ARM Securities. Mustapha, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show. What as far as the revenue drivers for the NNPC, what do you make of, I guess, what propelled them to this 674 billion figure for 2021?
Sure. First, I want to acknowledge that it's a positive. Going to 6.4 trillion in 2021. Billion.
Yeah, that would be nice, trillion. Yeah.
In 2020, no, it was 6.4 trillion.
Okay, that's the revenues, right?
Revenue.
Okay, got you. Sorry, I was talking about profits. Great, yeah.
From 3.7 in 2020.
Yeah.
So that's positive. And looking at the revenue segments, you see that it's compromised, or what constitutes it is services. So that includes things like seismic contracts, gas transmission tariffs. Then you're looking at the more core aspects of the business. So you're looking at revenue from crude oil sales, revenue from petroleum product sales, and revenue from natural gas. So revenue from crude oil sales, that constitutes about 28% to 30% of the total revenue.
Yeah.
And it grew by 123%.
Gotcha.
Revenue from petroleum product sales, that constitutes about 56%. So it takes the largest chunk, and that grew by about 60%. So there's positivity in that regard. Now, we cannot ignore the fact that this is coming from 2020, which is a COVID year.
Yeah.
We know what COVID did to the global economy.
Yeah.
We saw how the global oil markets was hit. We saw demand take a hit with the lockdowns during the year. We saw global inventories rise to significant levels. We saw crude oil prices. Brent went to $19.33 per barrel. And we saw WTI West Texas Intermediate go to a negative $37 per barrel, or even less than that.
Yeah.
So we cannot discount the fact that there's that base effect, right, which we're bouncing off, coming into 2021. So, essentially, this is where the revenue drive came from. And if you look at the profit after tax as well, there's that improvement there, 674 billion naira.
Yep.
Of course, that's a significant improvement. That's over 130% improvement. So yeah, that base effect, you need to factor that, as well as, the crude oil sales, the petroleum product sales, as the major contributors to that.
Well, I don't know if I just asked about the cost. We're looking at costs there, 5.3 trillion, I think 46% climbing for the cost of sales. I guess that comes with the operational environment for the company, yeah, as well as the cost increase. Yeah,
sure, absolutely. So if you look at in 2021, if you look at, so if you dissect the cost of sales, for example, you see that out of the 5.3 trillion naira, the major, what takes the major chunk of that cost is from petroleum products cost, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the petroleum products cost, which is about 3.9 trillion naira,
yeah,
you see that what contributes to that the most is under recovery. So you see that the government they are approved about 1.8 trillion naira, 1.83 trillion naira,
yeah,
for funds for the NNPC in order to clear some things. That included crude oil spills, that included pipeline maintenances,
yeah,
and of course what took 1.73 trillion naira. 1.78 trillion naira about that, yeah, was the subsidy, was the under recovery. So yeah, of course, in 2020...
Imagine not having to pay that and what that means for profits if you could move that aside to the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to deal with, from a petroleum products perspective, the operational costs, with your retail stations and so on and so forth.
There was some asset growth as well. They mentioned that as well. That's also, I guess, healthy for the firm. Even though, I guess, when you look at the assets, you can't help but talk about the refineries and the fact that they haven't been performing. But that was also, I guess, in your view, also positive as well?
Yeah, I would say positive. I like to look at things from a positive perspective, right?
Yes.
So, if you look at in 2020, for example, when the results were released for for the 2020 performance, we'll see that there was a lot of concern, right? A lot of material concern because
from the auditor,
from the auditors, from PwC, and others. Yeah. They were like, oh, listen, okay, fine, we posted this profit, right? However, we're not liquid, right? Because if you look at the current ratio, it was about 0.58, right? That means the corporation was not in a position to fulfill the short-term obligations. However, now what you see that if you look at the books, right, you see the current assets has increased. Yes, there was an improvement or an increase in terms of the asset from a PPE perspective. That's the property, plants and equipment perspective.
Yeah.
However, if you look at the current ratio, right, you see that now it's about 1.21, right? So that's an improvement
from the 0.8 that
from
you
0.58
0.58
in 2020. Yeah.
Fantastic. The news on wait, I need to read this quote. This is something that there's a quote from the financials where they said that the results would have been much better. Where is it? There it is. All right. The performance would have been greater if the operations in the year under review were free from incessant vandalism, crude oil, and product theft, among others. So we just talked about fuel subsidies and how that 1.7 trillion could have boosted this even further. But what's your take? I mean, this is it's a never ending. We just continue to talk about theft, oil theft in this nation. What do you make of that statement from them in the financials? Yeah,
absolutely. This is one of the things that has been, we've been dealing one of the woes within our oil and gas spaces, and for quite a while now. But we have even seen it exacerbated even in recent times. Yeah. We saw the GCEO of the NNPC right, come out recently, I believe it was the past week, talking about how we're currently producing about 1.2 million barrels per day. Well, that's a secondary source. Many will target as that. Yeah. And we are not, producing a potential which we could produce of about 600,000 barrels per day. And he said that, that was because of major trunk pipeline shutdowns, right? Or, halting operations with those pipelines. And that was because of a potential of there being thefts on those pipelines. So it's definitely something that, is quite a problem, is acting as a repellent, in terms of FDI investments in the country, or even FPI investment, because that spills over, doesn't it? So yeah, in terms of foreign investors, looking at Nigeria, that's definitely something they wouldn't like to happen. And us, seeing the governments come out and saying that they've been deploying security agency security personnel. We're seeing some authorities from the NNPC come out and talk about how countries like Mexico, countries like Cambodia, what they did was that they took or they implemented the strategy of using security personnel from outside the countries in order to deal with the problems that they have within the oil and gas space. So they're talking about them having to use that. But really, it's just an unfortunate situation at the moment. We're seeing, a lot of allegations. Oh, is this person, is there these religious leaders behind it? Is this politicians behind it? But as Nigerians, what we just hope is that they're able to nip it in the bud, sort it out.
Just fix it. Fix it. That's all we want. Fix it. NNPC is making a lot of headlines. I want to take you back to the announcement of the acquisition of the downstream assets of OVH Energy. In fact, just down the road, we're already seeing the rebranding. What do you make of that as far as the downstream sector and what it means, I guess, with this acquisition?
Yeah. I mean, I see it as positive. Yeah. Because let me take it from this angle, Rotus. So you see that NNPC, when he, became this LLC, it was sort of like this golden child. Yeah. And there were a lot of, potential. There was a lot of potential in a lot of people's minds as to what NNPC could go ahead and accomplish, And if we look at it from the perspective of Africa, because, before we start looking at other climes, we need to look at where we are. Charity starts at home, right? Yeah. Africa, as a population, is about 1.3 billion, right? Yeah. The global population is about 7 billion. Some say it will be 8 billion, by the end of next year, right? So meaning 1 in every 6-7 persons is an African, right? Now, if you look at the way Africa was in, say, 2010 to 2015, the big cities where the population was more dense than others, you're looking at places like Lagos in Nigeria, you're looking at places like Luanda in Angola, you're looking at places like Cairo in Egypt, right? And going forward, right, with the rates at which our population is growing, the 1 in 6 and 1 in 7 Africans that I was talking about before could become 1 in 5 in the next 10 to 20 years. Yeah. And if it continues at that rate, by the turn of the century, it become 1 in 3, right? What that means is that we could start to see an increase in urbanization. So aside from just these 3 cities which I mentioned, in the next few decades, what we could see is that there could be up to 20 cities just like that. We could see in Ugodaga, for example, in Burkina Faso. We could see the same situation in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Even here in Nigeria, Kano and Ibadan. And what happens when there's an increase in urbanization? When a lot of people move from the rural areas, that's from the villages.
Consumption goes up.
Consumption goes on. That puts more pressure on the energy resources. Right? This is where NNPC comes in. Now, NNPC coming in and expanding their retail footprints, right? Because they say a goal of about 1,500 retail stations, across parts of Africa. Yeah. With OVH coming in now, with OVH you're getting about 380 retail stations in addition to what you have, right? if you expand, your retail footprint like that in Nigeria, in Togo, you're already on that right track, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, the opportunities there's huge potential when it comes to, even because biomass is something that's quite significant in terms of utilization in Africa, right?
Yeah.
Natural gas, which Nigeria has an abundance of, or significant amount of, we could leverage that to provide LPG as an alternative to biomass use. I mean, the potential is there, and it's huge.
Yeah.
So the NNPC is on the right track with this acquisition. I think it's positive, and I think it's something that we should be excited about. I'm excited about it.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Mustapha Alao, investment research analyst with ARM Securities. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.